The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you for joining SAGE's webinar, Underestimating the Cyber Threats to SMBs. We are excited to have you join us today as we look at the realities of today's cyber threats against small businesses and how business owners can effectively balance cybersecurity against the other challenges their companies must tackle. Today's speakers are Al Pascual and Eder Ribeiro, both with Santique, a TransUnion company. Al is the SVP of Enterprise Risk Solutions and has vast expertise in data breach intelligence and fighting against fraudsters. Eder is a founding member and leader of Santique's Incident Response Forensics team and has years of experience leading real-world cyber incidents on a global scale. If you have any questions during the webinar, please enter them in the chat. And at this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Al and Eder.
Thanks, Andy. All right, Al, on today's webinar, we're going to be talking about true cyber threats affecting small businesses, including business email compromise and ransomware. And along the way, you're going to hear about real-life examples of how these threats have actually affected businesses just like yours. But in the end, we're not going to leave you hanging. We'll provide you with recommendations that are going to leave you better protected to navigate these risks in the future. So it's going to be a really interesting webinar today. I'm super excited. But let's start by talking about the threats. I think there's a fallacy, right? An idea that small businesses can't be targeted or are not being targeted by cyber criminals, and nothing can be further from the truth, unfortunately. Businesses like yours are being targeted every day. Now, when breaches occur, it's not often because someone's lost a laptop or dropped a USB drive in the trash by accident. Now, those things do happen, of course, but more often than not, it's cyber criminals that are actively targeting small businesses. They're targeting and compromising business systems, focusing on vulnerabilities, right? Not just technical vulnerabilities, but vulnerabilities in people, right? The way we respond to queries, business communications, normal processes. They are very attuned to how to take advantage of employees as much as they know how to take advantage of the technical vulnerabilities they find. Now, if you're wondering why they're going to target a small business, well, regardless of how they gain access to data or systems, whether it's technology or people, 10 out of 10 times, for them, it's all about the money, right? Pure and simple. A very clear example is ransomware. Eder's going to talk more about ransomware here in a minute, but when you think about ransomware and who it's affecting, 70% of ransomware attacks are affecting small and medium-sized businesses. And as it's clear in the name itself, again, for the criminals, it's all about the ransom. It's all about the money. So Eder, I'm going to turn these things over to you here. If you can tell us a little bit more, given your experience in helping small businesses clean up after things go wrong, help us understand how these things manifest, and maybe even share some examples, because I think that would be really interesting for today's attendees.
Absolutely, I'm happy to do it. Let's start with an example. I think that's always a fun way to go. What you are all looking at right here is a ransom note, a real ransom note that one of our clients who fell victim to a ransomware group called Lockbit. This is the note that they found on their systems. This is the note that all victims of Lockbit find in their systems. Often not, if you are targeted by Lockbit or by other similar threat actor ransomware groups, this might be the only file that works within your servers, workstations, and all your business systems. And this is all the information you're going to get. Essentially, a message of encryption, a threat that your data may have been compromised, a link to some sort of dark web site where the threat actor hosts. This site would be the only way to communicate with the threat actor if you need to communicate with them, which is quite common for a multitude of reasons. And for efficiency, and because these are the bad guys, they like to make a few threats, raise your attention to a few things, Whether some of them are accurate or not, that's case by case dependent. But the note itself tends to be a little boilerplate, but this is what a victim sees, which can be quite of a shock when you come into the office Monday morning and you were hoping to get to work, and now this is the only thing that actually works. So that's what it looks like to the average victim. Of course, a lot of stuff is happening behind the curtain, but we'll leave that for another time to, we're not going to get deep into the ones and zeros here. But let's take a step back, and think about this for a second. If you're experiencing this, first and foremost, some of you may be asking, what is ransomware? And there's some value in having at least a general understanding of that. So ransomware is a piece of malware. It's a piece of cryptographic malware, meaning it exploits concepts in cryptography. So that's the encryption, ones and, the mixing of ones and zeros, however you want to kind of look at it. It's a specific piece of software that threat actors use, and this kind of malware or software that's used for malicious purposes is intended to primarily do one thing and one thing only. And that is to block access to your data. That's to deny you access to the data that you own and host within your network. And upon blocking that access, just like Al said, threat actors do everything they do for one reason and one reason only: to make money. So they use the ability to lock you out from your own data to extort you via funding, usually Bitcoin and sometimes other types of cryptocurrencies, but they look to extort you to regain, to give you access back to your data. Often they will also even look to double extort you. And that will either be through a delivery of a partially working decryption tool, or through the threat of leaking your data your sensitive data onto the dark web if you don't pay. So that's the world that you find yourself in if you become a victim to ransomware. Let's get a next slide here, Al. So let's think about this a bit. How does this work, right? How does this whole ransomware situation come to affect an average small to medium sized business? This is essentially as you're seeing here on the slide, everyone, is essentially the kill chain or the attack, checklist for the average ransomware threat actor. It all starts with, either automatic probes. These are, scripts that get put out there, and they automatically start to probe IP addresses for very specific vulnerabilities. And if it gets a positive hit, it calls home and the threat actor gets an alert. But on the other hand, you also have the targeting. Threat actors are constantly looking to target specific companies or even geographical areas by IP range for very specific vulnerabilities that they know that they can take advantage of, or exploit as we call. And even more recently, ransomware as a service is now a large thing, where threat actors will pay another group of threat actors who dedicate their existence to doing the targeting and initial penetration, essentially the getting into your network, and then they sell that access to your network to the ransomware group, who then goes in there and executes their ransomware and encrypts your systems. But often, one of those three ways is how they found the victim, and from there, it all essentially goes downhill. They initially penetrate the network, they look around, they use common tools or some bespoke tools to understand the environment they're in. From there, once they understand what's going on in the network, they tend to escalate their privileges. Just think of getting the keys to the castle. That's what they're looking to do. They want the master key. And in the InfoSec world, that's the administrative credentials. That administrator username and password are going to give them access to many things in the network. So as soon as they get that information, which they can do through a myriad of different ways, now they download their malware onto your environment. and then they execute on the target. And as soon as the malware is executed, you now find yourself in a position where the files programmatically become encrypted. So that means the ones and zeros behind the files start to get garbled up and mixed around, and that will then make the file unusable to you. In the background, the malware is recording a lot of things, and it's doing a lot of stuff so it can later bring the file back to its original content if needed. And that's what's so effective about ransomware, because once you encrypt it, the chances of breaking that encryption are slim to none, and it would take incredible resources that are simply not available to pretty much almost all commercial entities, regardless of size. And there's other issues that come with trying to break encryption, but that's a bit outside the scope here. But once the threat actor has encrypted your data and potentially exfiltrated or stolen some of the data from your network, it becomes a wait and see game. They want to see, they know that there's a chance you might be able to recover, but there's a chance you might not be able to recover. And if you cannot recover, you now are reliant or potentially reliant on them to gain access back to your data. And that's why they plant that encryption, that ransom note that we saw on the last slide, or that you see this other sample of a ransom note right here to the right, because they want to point to you, hey, come talk to us and find out how much money we want, and find out what else to do and how to get your data back. Sometimes when the wait and see game does not work, they also can apply some persuasion techniques. It's not uncommon for threat actors to email the victim, or to call the victim, or to take other attack techniques, perhaps attack the victim's website that may be hosted elsewhere with a denial of service type attack, anything really, to raise the eyebrows of the victim company. I've even seen in cases where the parents of the owner of the company were called at home because the threat actor found their home phone number within some of the files and decided to harass the parents of the owner of the company to tell them essentially, hey, have your son call to us because we encrypted their data and we're going to leak it on the web. So they find all sorts of ways that can be very creative sometimes on how to get a hold of a victim if they really want to try to squeeze the victim for their funds. Some of you may also be thinking, well, what kind of money are we talking here? Unfortunately, I wish it was a magical figure, but that's not usually how it works. The calculation of how much to charge a victim can vary. One, simply depending on the threat actor and whoever the people are on the other side of the machine. Two, how many systems they encrypted, how big they think the business is. We've come onto cases where they see a website and they might think, oh, this business is of a decent size, but it ends up being actually fairly small business. And now you have a sometimes overinflated ransom cost. All these things can lead to it. But nonetheless, they are going to persuade you as best as they can to make payment on their threat. Now, with that being said, how do they make money? Because sometimes people can survive the ransomware attack and they don't pay. So in those events where they can't receive funds directly from the victim, that's when they will often sell the data that they exfiltrated or stole from your network. They will either sell it in some forum or on the dark web, or they will break the data down into compilation lists and sell it directly to another threat actor group, or again, in some sort of forum. Some threat actors even have their own shame sites where they also sell data through that site. So anyone can go in there, and they call it a shame site because they post parts of the data they stole from the business, usually, sometimes even all of it, as again another persuasion technique to say, hey, here's your data out there, anyone can see it. But they'll sell the data from there as well if the victim doesn't pay. So that can create some unique challenges, especially if you're in the kind of business where you host a lot of sensitive data, right? Where if you're an accountant, or if you're in the medical profession, you're a dentist. We've dealt with deals with ransomware scenarios where multiple dentist offices were compromised all at once, and some paid, some didn't. So some of them had patient information leak out into the dark web. But in the same way, we've seen data leak from construction companies, and even though it might not be personal identifiable information like date of birth or social security numbers for the clients, it's still business information, right? What a business is paying for specific services, or who the key players are, what a budget for something is, and that can have negative effects to the business if it leaks out there. So that's the main ways in how they make money. It's essentially directly through the victim, or it's by selling the data that they take from the victim if the victim does not pay. Rarely, they will make money from both ways. And some of you may be thinking, well, these are criminals, right? People of low moral character. Why do they not just get money, get paid from the victim directly and still sell the data? And that's a great question. Sometimes it happens, but more often than not, and this may be counterintuitive sometimes, they stick to their promise of not selling the data, at least not in any obvious way where the company's information is connected to it, so it's not traceable to the company, because ransomware groups, first and foremost, conduct themselves as a business. So if they start to break their promises all the time, then people like us and other companies in the space begin to inform clients that you cannot rely on that specific threat actor. We all keep metrics on these threat actors, and eventually people stop paying them, and it goes directly against their main primary directive, which is to make money. So it's counterintuitive to their business, and that's really the reality of it. One thing we talked about a little bit, this overview on how threat actors engage in ransomware. I want to go back and pay special attention to the probing and the targeting phase, because for many of you, and for really everyone, it's better to not have ransomware than to deal with the incident. So in order for you to not have ransomware, you have to make yourself a hard target. So let's talk about targeting a little bit. I'll mention that in the beginning of this call here today, that threat actors identify weak points or vulnerabilities in your network that they can take advantage of. These are usually external vulnerabilities, meaning weak points in the systems you own, which face out to the world, out to the internet. And then they target the human element. Ransomware, obviously, the weak points are there, and you've all heard of on the news of Colonial Pipeline or Kaseya or some of these SolarWinds, some of these big events where software have had issues and led to part of the compromise. But in reality, the vast majority of compromises occur because of the human factor. And as you can see here on this slide, humans, we all make mistakes, and whether it's a ransomware threat actor or another type, a threat actor that's focused on another type of activity, leveraging the human is exactly what they want to do. So let's talk a bit about human compromise. 96% of respondents would admit that email-based threats hit them this year. As you can imagine, email threats can often be how a ransomware event happens. An email compromise, leads to the threat actor making its way down into the local network, which leads to encryption. But 72% of these respondents mention how these email threats have risen. So we're seeing more and more often that email compromises sometimes lead to other compromises. So keep in mind, it's not just keeping your stuff up to date that will protect you from ransomware. It's also training and figuring out how to mitigate the human aspect, and the human threat. Another area that I want to spend some time on talking about today is the next big threat that we see every day, and that's the business email compromise. So that's the takeover of your mailbox, of your email account, okay? Lots of fraud and lots of activity happens where lots of money is exchanged from unknowing victims into threat actors' hands. As you can see here on the slide, in 2021, business email compromises cost $2.4 billion out to the industry. So this is a major issue. And you can see how the Microsoft sign-in there, that's often what victims of business email compromises see. And if any of you have a Microsoft account, well, this is a concern, right? Because it looks just like your Microsoft sign-in. And that's often how email compromises happen. A threat actor will send you an email that maybe looks legitimate. It might look like someone that you might recognize, but it'll look like they're looking to share to you a share file or something. And when you accept that share file, you get that. When you click on the link, you get that specific logo. And from there, you might put in your username and password to receive the file. Well, now they're in, right? So similar to ransomware, business email compromise starts with the probing and searching for a target phase. This is also quite randomized for most threat actors. Again, email, they're looking via from IP ranges. They're looking at those compilation lists that they see out on the dark web. There's lots of them with email addresses, so they would just pick a batch of them at random and attack batch by batch by batch systematically. So that's where it's important to make sure that your email is not part of data breaches out there. And once they target you, they're going to look to acquire access into your email tenant. And that may be an external vulnerability, that may be, but more often than not, it's the human element. And that's going to be to send you something that looks that looks legitimate, but includes some sort of malicious link, or takes you to a web page that's compromised and then places cookies on your browser, or gets you to download some other piece of malware. Every once in a while, there are also algorithm-based password breakers, for lack of better terms, that they use to try to make their way into your mailbox. These are what we call brute force attacks, okay? But what they all have in common is that they're methods to get into your environment one way or another for whatever their ultimate purpose may be. And once they get in, just like the ransomware folks, the email compromised threat actor also wants to stay hidden. They also want to remain persistent and be able to stay within your environment. So they're going to make changes in configurations. They're going to do other things within your email account that will allow them to navigate it without easily being caught. From then on, they go about committing their fraud, whether that is issuing, a fake fraudulent invoice that resembles yours to a vendor or to a client, informing them that your bank account information has changed, things of that sort, and eventually, convincing the client or attempting to convince that client that they are you, so that way the client pays, and or whether it's to send phishing emails from your accounts to then victimize the account of your address book. So that's another main focus for these kinds of threat actors as well. Just like the ransomware folks, they do this for the money. So whether it's to acquire more targets so they can eventually commit fraud in those target environments, or whether it's to commit direct fraud in your target environment, that's the main reason why business email compromises occur. Nonetheless, it's always for the purpose of somehow, some way, retrieving funds from you directly, or from your clients or vendors or trusted parties. That's a general overview on business email compromises. Okay, look out for these changes in configurations, added users. Look out for rules in your mailbox that may not be there before, things of that sort. Okay, look out for emails. Look at those headers. These are all things that you can do that are easy to pick up the low-hanging fruit, essentially. But the business email compromise is a very broad way of attack, and that's exactly why it happens more frequently than any other type of cyber attack in the market. That's about it on business email compromise. Al, back to you.
Thanks, Eder. I think we're going to move into a poll question, actually, Sandy. So if you want to go ahead and kick that off, that would be great. All right. It looks like the poll is open. This is an important question, I think, for everyone on today's webinar to be able to answer. And it's really, how confident are you that you could identify a breach or data loss event? I mean, outside, obviously, of getting notified by a third party or receiving a ransomware note. So it's not at all confident, somewhat confident, very confident. Just for the sake of time, let's go ahead and just close out the poll. Usually we want to give it a little bit more, but I know we want to get through the remainder of the content. All right, Sandy, can you share those results?
Absolutely. So we have 22% who are not at all confident, 61% are somewhat confident, and 17% very confident.
I mean, it's great to hear, that some of today's attendees are very confident, that they can identify an event, but it sounds like many are not. And I think that's why it's so important for businesses to get ahead of these threats before they become a problem. So with that, let's talk about the implications and what you can do to be better protected. And first and foremost, it helps to have a plan. So according to this stat, 4 out of 10 businesses, the small businesses, don't have a plan in the event of a cyber attack. Now, I say that because I think that's a little bit optimistic, personally, because SMBs are being targeted, right? And when things go wrong, more than half the time, they're paying up. And I mean, even to Edgar's point, most groups will help you get your data back, but not all will. So even if you're paying, there's no guarantee that you're going to see your data ever again. So then the question becomes, what can you do? Well, first, it helps to get ahead of the problem. You heard Eder talk a little bit about the dark web. Well, if you can get a sense as to whether or not information is available to cyber criminals on the dark web that they can use against you, that's going to give you a leg up, right? Because they're out there, they're buying and selling information that they can use to impersonate maybe you or your employees, or potentially manipulate someone into your company in providing them access. So now if you know what they know, you can make changes to stay safe. A good example there would be changing compromised passwords. Eder, can you quickly tell them about a breach readiness plan? That's another great option.
Absolutely. This is something that all businesses should have, in our opinion. It doesn't have to be complicated. As a matter of fact, it should be simple, it should be direct, and it should be custom. It should be bespoke to your business. These plans should address roles, responsibilities. It should provide direction to your leadership and to your staff on what to do in the event of any cyber incident, whether it's ransomware, or business email compromise, or anything else. It should point out what, who are your vendors that you rely on when things go bad. These are all, this plan should be your Bible. It should be your guiding, document on what to do when you find yourself a victim.
Perfect. And I think, this last one, I know it's a short and it's the final bullet point, but I think it really is the most important one, right? And that's be vigilant. Keep an eye out for things like suspicious communications. I mean, as Eder was mentioning before, social engineering is a major vector for these kinds of attacks, right? And the vigilance is worth it. And we try to put some numbers around this. And a ransomware attack or a data breach could really be a make or break event for a small business. I mean, you consider, what those payouts can look like, what it costs to remediate, some of these breaches. Now, we've talked about some serious threats, the steps you can take to stay safe, but it's important to know you're not on your own. And you can actually access dark web monitoring, and get a breach readiness plan by taking advantage of Sage Security Shield. It's free with your Sage 50 Cloud subscription. I would say just click the link. I don't know if the link works in the webinar, but you're going to get a separate handout after the webinar today, where you can get access to Sage Security Shield. Just use the code to activate. And that's it. Now with that, I want to make sure that everyone took away as much as they possibly could. If not, there will be the webinar provided, at least the content from the webinar provided. After this is all done, you're going to get a separate infographic with more information. And just know again that Sage is here to help. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their time. I want to thank Eder for joining me today and Sage for hosting this event. I hope that you all stay safe and have a great rest of the week. Thank you, everybody.